Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over the past year, we've heard our Republican colleagues claim that their solution in the One Big Beautiful bill will somehow make college cheaper for working families. This is the same bill that cut $1 trillion out of Medicaid and over $180 billion from SNAP. The logic is hard to follow. By leaving millions without health care and struggling to buy groceries, higher education will apparently just become more accessible. It is no wonder that when the American people finally had the chance to see what was in this hideous bill, it was so unpopular that my Republican counterparts had to rebrand the name. But just because you put working families in the title doesn't mean you are not screwing them over. The reality is there is no amount of sugarcoating that can undo the damage that will be done by this disastrous legislation. Ms. Morgan, I'd like to ask you some basic questions to correct the record. Ms. Morgan, does this new law require schools to immediately lower their costs?
It does not.
Does this law drastically increase funding for Pell Grants and other grant programs so that students won't have to borrow loans to go to college?
It does not.
Okay, so without more grant assistance, without forcing colleges to lower their costs, does this bill provide more access to federal loans?
It does not.
All right, thank you. So we're not making colleges lower their costs. We are not providing more grant aid. We are not taking away federal loan options. Where do we expect families to come up with the money to make up the differences, Ms. Morgan?
I think there are two options. I think there are people who will not go to college because college has become more expensive under this bill, and I think there are people who are going to take on private student loan debt as a result of it.
So let's talk about the private market. When this bill was being considered by Congress, private lenders were celebrating because they knew that this was their opportunity to cash in on the backs of families desperate to find a way to pay for their kids to go to college. Because these type of loans involve a lot more financial risk and fewer protections for consumers. Ms. Morgan, can you expand on why these private loans are so risky?
You know, there are a couple of different kinds of private loans. There are what we consider to be like the bread and butter private loans that are offered by maybe like a Sallie Mae or a Navient. These loans are going to have a higher interest rate, and they're going to have fewer options for people when they get in trouble on paying their loan. They don't have the forgiveness options. They don't have the income-based repayment options. There's another kind of like underbelly of the student loan program that is predatory credit products. They're going to be available to lower-income students who can't get those bread and butter products. And those are going to be even worse. They're going to have higher interest rates. They're going to have more onerous repayment terms, and they're going to land people in default.
Mm-hmm. And how does the Trump administration's gutting of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau increase these risks?
There's no cop on the beat anymore. You know, there's no one keeping an eye on those private student lenders to make sure, not even that they're treating students well, right, but that they're just following the basics of our consumer financial laws. So I think that's a huge concern. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that the CFPB over the past 4 years has still been trying to clean up the problems we saw private student lenders cause 2 decades ago. There are people who are still trying to deal with loans that they took out 20 years ago through predatory colleges and predatory lenders, and so there's no one there to help those borrowers either.
It is clear that the Republicans' big, ugly bill does nothing to make college more affordable. But what it does do very well is push working families into the jaws of the private market. Thank you so much for your testimony today, and I yield back.
Thank you. I'd like now to recognize